A devilish smile crossed Tom's face as he imagined Jerry being skinned alive and then decapitated. Unfortunately, such a kind of death would be too merciful for that miserable rat, Tom said to himself, as he wandered aimlessly through a large field on the outskirts of the big city where he used to live. The weather was cold and wet, and Tom felt miserable because of that. Fuck, it's even as if nature hates me, Tom bitterly muttered to himself, while remembering the happy and comfortable life he used to have while he lived in the house of his previous owners. Too bad Jerry ruined everything, Tom lamented, remembering all the disasters that miserable mouse made. Every single time he attempted to steal food from the kitchen, Tom tried to stop him several times, just to be blamed for the whole mess caused by that treacherous rodent. Eventually, Tom's owner simply decided to abandon him, and now the gray cat didn't have anywhere to go. To make things worse, winter was close and each night was colder than the previous one, making Tom start to fear the worst. If I don't find a place where I can spend the night, I'll be dead by tomorrow. Fortunately, the feline was soon able to find an abandoned hut in the middle of some parched crops. In another time, that place was the home of an old farmer, but that man had died several years ago and his property was now uninhabited. Well, at least it's better than nothing, Tom thought, before entering inside the old hut. There wasn't very much to see in that place. The very few remaining furniture was covered by dust and spiderwebs, but Tom didn't care about that. After all, being in that place gave him some good memories of the times when he still had a home. That night, the feline used a battered sofa as a bed. That sofa was quite uncomfortable and had a terrible smell to it, but Tom was so tired that he fell asleep almost instantly. While he was sleeping, Tom dreamed of himself torturing and killing Jerry, and that dream made him very happy. In the first part of the dream, Tom cut parts of Jerry off using one of his claws, and Jerry cried and screamed for mercy. The pathetic pleas of the mouse only made the feline to feel even more excited to torture him, chopping his tail off before skinning him alive. The screams of pain by Jerry while he was agonizing were the most beautiful sound Tom could ever imagine. However, a cold wind coming from a broken glass of one of the windows made Tom wake up, interrupting his dream. Damn it, Tom whispered with annoyance. It was too early and too dark to continue with his journey, so the gray cat was ready to start sleeping again. But in that moment, he perceived a strange yet familiar noise. It was Jerry's voice. But that's impossible, Tom thought in those moments. Jerry is still in the city, living in the house of my ex-owners. Maybe it was only my imagination. However, the voice spoke once again, and this time Tom was 100% sure it wasn't his imagination. Jerry the mouse was there, and he was talking with someone else. Cautiously, Tom leaned out the window and looked left, being able to distinguish two small rodent figures walking in the distance. Tom immediately recognized both of them. They were Jerry and his young nephew Nibbles. Oh, how much he hated those little bastards. It was because of them that now Tom had lost everything. But now fate had their paths crossed again, giving Tom a slight chance to finally achieve his desired revenge. Meanwhile, the two mice were completely unaware of Tom's presence in the place, since they were too tired after having to walk a long distance from the city, where a rat extermination campaign had been taking place during the previous days, forcing Jerry and Nibbles to become fugitives in order to survive. Like Tom, they both were looking for a place to spend the night, and they had just discovered the abandoned hut, walking towards the place as fast as they could. Without wasting a second, Tom hid inside an old cupboard, from where he observed how Jerry and Nibbles entered the cabin by a hole in the broken glass of one of the windows. Do you think we'll be safe here, Uncle Jerry? Nibbles asked Jerry, as he gave a quick look to the place. Don't worry, Jerry replied. This old hut has been abandoned for a very long time. There are no humans here. If there were, there would have been any kind of indication of their presence. Maybe there aren't any humans here, but what about wild animals, Uncle Jerry? The little diaper-wielding gray mouse asked with a worried expression on his face. What if there's some kind of hungry beast hidden here? Don't talk nonsense, Nibbles. Most of the animals who live in this part of the countryside are just birds, insects, and rodents like us. There's nothing to be afraid of. Well, if you say so, Uncle Jerry, Nibbles replied with a shy voice. I guess we could use that old dusty sofa as a bed for the night, Jerry suggested, while looking at the very same battered sofa, where Tom had been sleeping a few minutes ago. However, Nibbles disagreed with him and started to discuss with Jerry. After a short discussion, the two mice decided to sleep on a padded chair which seemed more comfortable and more clean than the padded sofa, and which had enough room for the two of them. Jerry and Nibbles gave each other a big hug and said goodnight, falling asleep immediately. Once Tom was completely sure his future victims were fast asleep, Tom came out from the old cupboard where he was hidden, and started to look for some object he could use as a weapon against the two mice, finding a rusted hammer which he used to instantly break the legs of Jerry and Nibbles without giving them time to react. That's how the rodents were brutally awakened from their dreams, screaming and feeling a horrible, totally unbearable pain in their legs. It didn't take too long before their screams of pain turned into screams of horror, as the two mice realized who attacked them, and their fear only started to ignite the desire of Tom to torture them even more. "Hello, Jerry," Tom said in a taunting tone, as he used one of his claws to cut down one of Jerry's little fingers. "It's been a long time since our last meeting." "Bastard," replied Jerry as he glared at Tom. That's not so nice, Jerry. What kind of language is that? I guess I'll have to teach you a little lesson." With a big malevolent smile on his face, Tom started to break the fingers of Jerry and Nibbles one by one, feeling a sick pleasure in each one of the screams of agony the two mice made as he slowly broke their bones. At first, Jerry's attitude was defiant, throwing several insults at Tom among his screams of pain, but once the sadistic feline started to hurt Nibbles, Jerry's insults became desperate pleas. "No, stop! Do whatever you want with me, but please don't hurt him." Those words only convinced Tom to torture the little mouse in a much more cruel way, in order to break down Jerry's spirit, who couldn't do anything but watch in horror at his dear nephew being assassinated in a slow and painful manner. First, Tom used his claws to make an incision on the little mouse's chest, and then another one on his stomach. Both Jerry and Nibbles cried with despair and begged for mercy, but Tom just laughed at their suffering, starting to remove the insides of the little gray mouse, which he proceeded to eat in front of the two mice, making them vomit. "Bastard, you fucking bastard!" an angry and hopeless Jerry cried, unable to stop the atrocious murder of his family member. "Uncle Jerry," the little mouse whispered as he was agonizing. The pain is too much for me." Those were his last words, and several tears flowed down Jerry's face as he witnessed the demise of his beloved nephew, while Tom just kept laughing. As a twisted joke, he decided to behead the corpse of Nibbles, using the head of the little mouse as if it was a finger puppet. "Hey, Uncle Jerry, if you think what happened to me was fucked up, that's because you have no idea of what's gonna happen to you." "Fuck you, you miserable asshole," Jerry replied, with an inconceivable fury. Despite the intense pain of his broken legs and severed fingers, he always hated Tom, but now he hated the gray cat more than anything in this world. "You have no fucking soul. You are a fucking monster. Go ahead, insult me all you want. That won't change your destiny, miserable rat," replied Tom, before using one of his claws to violently sever Jerry and then cut off his tail and left ear. The mouse was left on the brink of death, but Tom still wanted to make him suffer until his last second of life, mortally wounding him with his claws. And then, while Jerry was agonizing, Tom decided to trepan the head of his victim, removing in that way a large portion of his gray matter. "And now, rats, look what I have here." The last thing Jerry saw before dying was that horrible image of Tom, tasting with vile delight a part of his own brain. 愛してる